We thank you once again for your goodness towards us to give us this opportunity, learn your word. Thank you for Dr. Joel Arnold, Lord, giving him this burden, this heart to train us. Lord, you know our needs. We pray you continue to use him, Lord, to meet our needs so that we can serve you better in the ministry. We just pray tonight you guide us with your Holy Spirit, Lord, to apply your word in our life. We thank you and pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, sir. Okay, I'm looking forward to our time tonight for a number of different reasons and excited about a couple of things we're going to do here. Before we jump into that, let me just see if you had any lingering questions from the assignment about these case studies. So I can drop that in actually into the chat again if you would like. And if you have questions, happy to talk about those. I think as these worked out, I think it was I want to say number 3, maybe ended up with the fewest. But that's fine. I mean, as far as that goes, as you look through these, I want these to fit your ministry. I want them to fit your burden. So if there's a specific thing that you just kind of know, hey, this slots into something in my life right now, I want that to happen. But anyway, as you're looking across those, I want to make sure everyone has one. And then that really is the way we'll use our time next time. We get back together, we'll be working through these case studies and just basically practicing. Even if I noticed some did not claim one last time, and that might be if you view yourself as more of an audit type status. That's fine. I mean, no problem, of course. My proposal for you here, though, would be I do think you'll benefit more if you're a little invested in it. So, I mean, you don't have to feel like you committed to one, but I would say for yourself, maybe pick one and then just spend some time thinking about it. And I think if you do that, then you're going to profit more because your mind is already going down that track. Anyway, that would be my proposal and encouragement. I think you'll be glad if you do make that investment. Give me a little second here. I've got a plug power problem. There we go. I think we're good. Okay, so anyway, if that's you, if you're thinking of yourself more as audit, go ahead and pick one and just think about it, ponder it a little bit. The process that I was proposing for this, I also included in the document that I reposted there in Dropbox again. But the method that I was proposing here, it won't hurt us any to look at it, was that you take some time, think about what are the underlying questions you would need to answer in order to engage with this, and then think through the branches of theology, how those are expressed, each one of those branches in that, and kind of the data points that you can pull from each branch. So data points you can pull for exegesis, exegesis, biblical, systematic, historical, practical. And then here, this matters to me in the sense, my idea last time, kind of a spectrum of how dogmatically we hold something. Okay, so we don't hold everything the same level of dogmatism. How strongly do you need to hold this? Do all good Christians agree with you? I mean, right? Trinity, all good Christians agree with me, period. Okay. Deity of Christ, all Christians agree with me, right? We have to agree on this. There's other points where we can take it or leave it. And then a kind of a pastoral question of how you would practically handle it, which is practical theology, but a specific branch, I guess, of practical theology. All right, that's what I was going for. And while I'm on that, that's relating to an initial thing. If you have questions, interrupt me, drop them in the chat. But that's relating to an initial question that someone asked me here, and I would kind of like to launch out on that because I liked the question a lot. I shouldn't pick a favorite question, but if I had to, it's a good question, and it's made me have to engage with some questions and probe some things. So let's look at it. The question this person asked was about the divisions of theology, and their question was, let me share it so we can read at the same time. Uh, why does theology need to be categorized in divisions like systematic theology, exegetical theology, biblical, systematic, practical, and historical? Is there a particular reason that it has to work that way? It's a great question, because one comment I made here for myself is that I'll admit I am rarely conscious of the phase I am in at a given moment. I mean, for myself, I rarely look down through these distinctions, or let's say, as I'm theologizing, as I'm thinking through these things for myself, I am rarely saying, okay, right now I'm doing XYZ. That doesn't really happen. More, I'm just doing the process. So her question really pertains strongly here. It's a solid question. Do the distinctions really help then? Is there a point in really carving these things out and separating them? So here's my proposal as far as the benefits that I think. And then I'd like to hear from you what things I left out or what things we could add in here as proposed benefits of having theology without recognizing these distinctions. I think so. The distinctions are heuristic. Heuristic means kind of, well, I explained, pedagogical and practical, provisional. So it's a heuristic framework. In other words, it's not like I go to any particular passage. You know, the 12 disciples gather around Jesus and they say, what are the 5 main divisions of theology? And he says, well, let me talk to you about that. Obviously, I mean that in itself sounds facetious because it would be ridiculous. So there's nothing like that. We recognize that. And yet the categories are, for pedagogical reasons and for explanatory reasons, they're still helpful because they help us process what we're doing. And here, a first stab at it, I do think it helps me later to return and reflect on what I did. Okay, so how about this? Try this as a trial. Maybe I'll pause for a second and have us all process it for a second. What was the most recent theological question you were confronted with and had to process? All right, pause for a second, think about it. I mean, besides what we've discussed tonight. What was the most recent theological question you were confronted with just today and had to process and think about? Okay. The irony of this, if you go with my really broad definition of theology, then all of life is theology. And so, you know, if you have a conversation, you're not going to get through it without having some discussion of theology, right? If you're thinking about anything, questions about God and the world using script. For me, my wife and I were talking a little bit ago because she's teaching a lesson on teaching the Bible to children. So we were talking about what the difference between wisdom and information, just having information versus actually living that out in life. Okay, so I'm giving that example for myself. Actually, I would love to hear from you in the chat what the thing was that came to your mind, the last theological question you remember pondering. Love to see some of those in the chat because I'm just curious. But okay, so if that's our question, that is that a practical theology question? Probably not. It maybe is but somewhere between biblical and systematic theology. The question of the difference between wisdom and information. So, okay, we process that. But from there, I end up asking exegetical questions. How do Proverbs and Ecclesiastes talk about wisdom? So the difference in those books on wisdom. I end up asking practical questions, meaning when people say something like, or when they learn a lot of information, but they don't apply it to their lives, what's going on with that? That's a practical thing, like what's going on in their heads? Why are they doing that? How can somebody stuff their head full of information but not actually try to live it out? So that would be a practical theology question. You could do like a historical theology. You could pay attention to people's failures in the past and or thinking about the wisdom, thinking about educational philosophy in the past. Okay, so there's a lot of different angles it comes in. Never occurred to me to think about which one I was doing. This was like 20 minutes ago. Never occurred to me to think about which branch I was in at that moment. All right, so if that's true, then is this really helpful? And my argument is yes, because sometimes I do come back later and reflect on what I did. And I do think, well, let me put that away for a second. I do think in the process, when I come back and reflect on what I did, I discover maybe that there were places where I was a little imbalanced. Maybe I went in this direction, but I neglected this over here. Okay, what I just said a moment ago made me think, yeah, what can I do with historical theology on this? Right? It hadn't occurred to me. So that's this idea here. One role, I think, could be ensuring that you have taken into account all of the core considerations, kind of like a pre-flight checklist. I know guys who do their sermon preparation. I don't, but I know guys that do their sermon preparation like this. They have a paradigm, and they just go through and they make sure that they hit everything, right? Did I look at the passage for this? Did I check this? Did I go here? And it's just to make sure, like a pre-flight checklist. As an expression of that, I was pondering my own writing this is for the class I'm teaching this semester it's a systematic theology class, essentially. Bible doctrines, undergrad level, and then sometimes I do grad, depending on the semester. And I discovered in the process of writing my notes for that Bible doctrines or systematic theology, I think, too often leaves out biblical theology concerns. So, for instance, like a classic systematic theology question, did the Spirit indwell believers in the Old Testament? We think of that as a strictly systematic theology question. I've sat in seminars where that was the topic that a guy talked about for an hour, and basically the whole direction of everything was a systematic theology direction. I really think the answer to that, it's a biblical theology question, because it has to do with indwelling the temple. Later, not the temple, you are the temple. Okay, so if I follow it out like that, I get some answers that are a lot more helpful. It occurred to me when I was writing, I had never read in any systematic theology an explanation of what is the point of Jesus' baptism. That's kind of interesting, I think. I mean, you say, well, that's biblical theology. I mean, maybe. But no, I mean, really, like, to take a Bible doctrines class, you get done this major event, Jesus' baptism, or even what's the significance of the resurrection, and you're just like, I don't know. I don't think that's great. So that's a kind of a thing that slips through the cracks. Why was Jesus tempted? I mean, we'll talk about temptability and impeccability, and we'll have like a whole systematic theology discussion about that, but maybe never explain to people why he was tempted in the first place. So it's like systematic theology with a biblical theology flavor. And I don't think I would have thought of doing that apart from being aware of the branches a little bit. And the distinctions actually highlighted for me, wait, something's missing here. Something's falling between the cracks. Last concern I'll drop in here, and then I would love to get your feedback or thoughts that you have also on this. Final, I think it helps us recognize patterns of priorities. What I mean is, I think there is a natural logical order behind some of this stuff. Meaning, when people do something like, well, I'm going to teach this doctrine because I need to motivate my people to evangelize. I mean, it's a good motivation, right? We want people to evangelize. But the reason that thinking is off and messed up, and it's going to go bad places, is because you started at the top of the pyramid and pushed it down. I have a practical concern. I need to make people do this thing, so I'll just create something. Versus, at least in terms of the logical order, the order of authority, let's say that, the exegesis comes first. And you start with the texts, and then working from the text, you go up layers of abstraction, levels of abstraction as you go. So I think that helps me. It helps me to separate those out and realize what's going on. This one is a helpful distinction. I think helps the distinction of the disciplines helps me process this. Otherwise, you're stuck here thinking maybe is historical authoritative, the traditions of the church. Because this is a tradition of the church, we should do it. Well, I mean, you pause for a second and that's off, right? I mean, no, just because the church did it doesn't mean I should do it. Lots of really messed up things have happened. But it acts as a guard, a referee, sometimes a confirmation. If I'm the first person to have ever discovered XYZ insight, I at least should pause a while. I'm not saying it's impossible, but at least pause, right? And a confirmation where within my own period, I thought it was interesting. Dr. Minnick, Andrew Minnick was with us, and he said the concept of the fatherhood of God, God as father and Adam as son at creation. That idea was pretty much assumed until liberalism made it a concern, and so people backed off of it. Well, that's interesting, where, that's not been a way I assumed I should think. But if you go back historically, you'd find that in the majority of the thinking of the church, people have thought that. All right, to me, that's a kind of a wait. Let's get that back into the mix. Maybe we lost something here. And then finally, what I basically already said, practical conclusions should come only after we've considered other things. Okay, what do you think? Give me some. What do you think here? Any feedback or ideas or things that have pop into your mind on the basic question, why is it necessary to have these divisions, 5 divisions of theology? How about this? We could do a follow-up. One of the guys asked in the chat, does every question need to hit all 5 points in order to be complete? It's an interesting question. In other words, am I sometimes going to go through the theological process and I never really mix much historical in there? If that happens, are my conclusions invalid or a little off somehow? What do you think? Any feedback there? Brother Joseph asking, what other ways are there to slice the theological cake? I haven't really heard of other ways. Yeah, I see what you say. If you say like covenant theology versus dispensational theology, those are different. They're not really like overall disciplines, are they? They're frameworks that you bring. So you can find other pairs. Denominational theologies. You can, in certain areas, you can do like more reformed soteriology. You can do these different frameworks that we kind of put as a structure. But more, I think what that is like the lens through which you're seeing all of theology, less the divisions or the disciplines that are in the theological process. So I think this is I would argue, a little different. This is good. There's some good, yeah, Brother Kenneth, those are presuppositions-ish. What do you say? I want to say every other person's denominational perspective is a presupposition, but me, I'm just giving the straight out Bible. I'd love for that to be true. I'd love to say that's true. I'm not that confident in myself. So yeah, I agree with you ish. They're presuppositions, but the way I would go backwards is to say I kind of think we're always falling back on presuppositions. We'd like to hope that we're not. We'd like to hope we're coming in independently, but it's so hard to. I'm always part of an interpretive community, and that always is going to shape some of my thinking. So it helps me be guarded against it the most, I guess, if I'm aware of it. Yeah. But yeah, it's good. We presuppose sola scriptura. Yeah, true. Someone asked here, and it's not, this is a private question, so let me paste it in here for all to be able to see as well. Someone asked, should we think and consider the 5 disciplines of theology as we do a doctrinal belief, like a doctrinal statement, or as we do sermon preparation? And my argument here would probably go, ideally, you want to get these disciplines and methods into your blood enough that you just do them, and it's just part of the way you think. it doesn't hurt to stop and think, wait, did I consider these? But you want to get them into the process if you're thinking that it's just the process of what you normally do when you sit down and ask a theological question. And then from time to time, I do think you stop, you back up, you get in the helicopter, and you evaluate. What's the balance of what's happening here? I'd give an illustration of this, I think, if I was doing for myself. When I came fresh out of seminary, I was a little more suspicious of systematic theology and a little heavier on the biblical theology side. A little bit of that is, part of that is a BJU thing. And that was really deep into my thinking. I don't say that as anything I repudiate. I still highly value biblical theology. I think what happened was teaching systematic theology, Bible doctrines and systematic, teaching it and getting asked questions. And the students don't ask questions that follow down biblical theology tracks. So there's a way in which you can kind of get away with doing more pure biblical theology in an academic context, where it doesn't have to hit the road of the questions of life. But it's when you start getting the questions from the students that don't fit any paradigm. I mean, bring that in. Okay, how would I answer that? I think over the last 10 years, in my life anyway, I have moved from maybe being a little suspicious of systematic theology, perhaps in an unwarranted way, towards appreciating and being grateful for it. Okay, stacking on the question about hitting all the 5 points. Does having more points make your answer more legitimate? Again, what I would say here is I don't think you're going to be able to separate them out as in, okay, you got 4 out of the 5. Your thinking probably starts to just imbibe all of them. But yes, I think your thinking will be more robust. I think my theology would be more robust if I had a stronger historical theology side. I think that's a weakness in the way that I process. I wish I was better on that, and that's a thing I need to grow in. So that's the kind of thing I mean. I do think it would be more robust if we're able to use a full, complete picture instead of just being set down in one. Excellent comments here. I hope you're paying attention. This is great. Remembering there are 5 points help me not to leave out one. Biblical theology is often left out by a past generation. Academics often leave out practical theology. That's great. And many leave out historical theology, probably because it's hard. How do you do it anyway? I mean, you have to just draw from a huge amount of content in order to get there. Comment here, if I may, on historical theology, historical and systematic. To get some help, the biggest thing that's helped me there, Bavinck. Take a look at Bavinck if you don't use him. He will take a systematic theology question, and he will start at the fathers and walk you all the way through. Well, I mean, he's missing the last century and a half, but he'll walk you through about 1,800 years of church history, and it's brilliant. So if you have a specific question, you can see someone who was all read up on this, being able to talk you through the historical question all the way through. It's excellent. It's a really good way to do it. Dr. K has taught a class doing historical theology thematically, which is a cool concept. So take a theme, and then you go through all the way through historical. It's hard. It takes really knowing your way through stuff. But that's a way that it can be done very well. And a comment here that's maybe just for our context here, specifically Philippines, but someone commented helpfully here. BT is maybe less considered, as far as I know, among pastors in the Philippines. And I would say, sa tingin ko, I don't think it's just Philippines. I think that's pretty broadly. But here's a concern I have in general, like examples. If I ask a lot of church members, how was an Old Testament believer saved, they have no idea. That's not good. That's the kind of things that we've got to, we should make sure people know that. Make sure people know that people were saved in the Old Testament by faith in the coming Messiah. It's important, right? Because otherwise they're reading their Old Testament and it's all confusing. In fact, probably the general ignorance of the Old Testament and inability to read the Old Testament with profit is directly linked to our, broadly speaking, failure to explain biblical theology, right? And so if you don't know the covenants, if you don't know the framework of you're looking ahead to the Messiah, when will he come, and all of the prophecies pointing to him, the Old Testament is just a strange document, and that's not good. So, yeah, very much. Okay, great. I'm going to keep on moving here. It was an initial question, and one that I enjoyed working on, one I enjoyed thinking about. Okay, yeah, what is the purpose that we're pursuing here? Let me hit one or two topics, and then I want to go to another thing that I'm going to throw at you, and we'll just spend some time processing together. So I've got a handful of things here that are specific to like the biblical texts and how that works. Let's take a look at those here. A question went, and I think he's quoting here from, quoting from Blomberg, Unity and Diversity of Scripture. Apparent contradictions in the text may be due to a corrupt text or to, and these other things are part of the rest of this sentence. The right question is, how can I say that this or that certain passage of the Bible is corrupt, when in fact I don't have the opportunity in the past to have touched, to have handled with my hands, to study the original manuscripts, or the autographs, we should say maybe, written by the apostle, and comparing it with other manuscripts? Are we just dependent on what other Bible scholars say, and is that legitimate? We touched on this a little bit before, so some thoughts I'll throw at that and pursue it just a little bit. This can bring uncertainty to people when they start processing what's going on with the biblical text and the manuscript questions. That's why this is an issue. That's why I do think it matters to inoculate people, to help teach people on the front end so that they don't one day come across there are different go in an odd direction as a result. So a couple of thoughts. One, no one since the first few generations after the apostles, no one has had access to a text that wasn't a copy. And that means then everyone for the last 1,500 years, we're all in the same boat. You know, it's tempting to think this is like a modern problem, a problem of the last 400 or 500 years, which is the period, I mean, really the last 200 or 300 years, which is the period that would be developing an actual discipline of a named discipline with canons of textual criticism or textual analysis. But truthfully, it's not a modern thing. It's not a problem of the last 200 years. It's not like if you go back 400, 500 years, they don't make textual decisions. Everyone makes decisions. Everyone has to decide. And everyone has to make tough decisions. Here's something fun. I don't think I've never shown you this. And I want to look at it together because it's just fun to look at. So what I'm pulling up here, it'll be a split second, is the historic English tradition. And this, you can go verse by verse here. I'm just doing this in accordance. And let me share it over to you. You can go verse by verse here and see how an individual verse developed over the history of translation. So I just picked John 1. And here, what you're going is Wycliffe, Tyndale, Geneva, Bishop, King James, ESV. It would be fun to put in here. Anyway, there are a couple more we could put in here, but this is what we have. This is what I have anyway. In the beginning was the Word. The Word was, this is interesting. Some of these are just, this is just how you write it, how you spell it. But the Word was at God, and God was the Word. Okay, of course, that's not even grammatical for us. But this is interesting, and God was the Word is very different from what we ended up with, because Tyndale on we get, and the Word was God, right? That's the only significant difference. I think everything else is just the way that you spell stuff. But let's keep on going, because it doesn't just stay there. Wycliffe and I think one other, if I remember right, are doing, yes, Geneva. This was in the beginning with God. the same was in the beginning with God. Okay, and the King James, what we're accustomed to, the same was in the beginning of God. ESV and the modern translations have gone, he was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him. Without him was made no thing. That thing was made. That reads a little rough to my modern ear. All things were made. This is really fascinating to me. The next three were made by it, because they're thinking of it going back, pronoun reference to word, the word. All things were made by it, and without it was made nothing that was made. And it's the King James that takes us back to made by him. It was without him was not anything made that was made. And you can just keep on going like this. In him was life, the life was the light of men, the light shineth in darkness. That's pretty similar. Just notice, though, Wycliffe has divided the verse off differently. So apparently we have a difference of versification at that point. I don't know the history of that or what happened there. But you have places like that where you see at Wycliffe, the rest, King James, or here, Tyndale on divides it here. Wycliffe includes both in there, and then the next verse is shorter. And the darkness comprehended not it, but the darkness comprehended it not. Anyway, it's fun to go through here. Just click through and just watch the way the verses develop. I spent, I don't know, maybe 20, 30 minutes playing around with some of this earlier today. And mainly what I was looking at was some place where they all went a different direction on a textual decision. They're pretty similar. But here's one example. There were a couple others like that. Here the deal is the third part of the waters, right here. The third part of the waters versus the third part. So Wycliffe is going to say the third part of the waters was made to wormwood, is relation 8:11. And ye third part, but there's no of the waters, was turned to wormwood. Therefore the third part of the waters is back in, of the waters is back out, of the waters is back in, and then the modern translation, or ESV at least, is doing it's back in. Okay, so anyway, I mean, they're split. There's a handful of places where it's not just a translational thing, but it's actually a textual thing, and they're going different directions and such. Anyway, I find that interesting, just as maybe a little bit of a nerding out thing, to watch the history of the English tradition and how it went. The point I'm intending to make here is just to recognize the question of textual decisions. It's not just a modern thing. Somebody has always had to do it. And then the last point, or the other point I would want to toss in here. No, I have two more. Another point I would want to put in here. The question, are we just dependent on what Bible scholars say? I argued in a previous lecture, we always are. I mean, right? We always are somewhere. I can't be an expert in everything. I can't even be an expert in 10% of the things I would like to be, right? Within the specialty of theology, right? So, I mean, some of the decisions that are getting made in Old Testament lexicography have to do with comparative linguistics to Ugaritic. Like, who has time for that? But you have a guy who that's what he does, right? I met a guy who was studying Egyptian. That's like what he was doing with his life. Okay, so I mean, people are out there like that. Nobody can master all those things. Yes, we are ultimately going to be dependent on other people. That's the nature of the church, right? You can't know everything. You can't even know everything you need to know. You're going to depend on other human beings. You have to. Another piece that fits into that is just to recognize everybody always has had to depend on other people. So it's tempting to feel like, wait, if I choose among updated translations, that puts me in an awkward spot now because now I have to depend on scholars. No, I'm just going to keep it simple, and I'm just going to go to the traditional King James 1611. All you're doing is depending on dead scholars, right? I mean, they were, right? The Bible didn't come to us ever in English, so somebody made those decisions. And those guys made decisions on the people that came before them, like what I was just showing you. So much of Wycliffe, so Wycliffe really called a lot of the wording that we know today, all the way down to our modern translations. Wycliffe called most of that, right? And what that means is all of us have depended on somebody that came before us. We've always done it. And there's no way you can go back and say, I'm not depending on other scholars. You always are. Last comment. If anything, I would argue that the modern period has brought me closer than ever before in the history of the world. I'm the closest that we've ever been to being able to check things out for myself. So anyway, it's not like the modern era has created a new situation where I'm dependent on other people. It's actually leveled the playing field more than ever before in the history of the world. Because in 2020, it actually is possible to go online and for free check out a lot of the major manuscripts. A lot of them have been digitized, and you can find them and you can look at them. That literally was not true when I was in seminary 10 years ago. I mean, so just that period of time, it's moved. But if nothing else, like our assembled text, NA28 and so forth, give you in the apparatus this incredible window and telling you where all of the variants are. So yeah, people 400 years ago didn't have that. They had to gather whatever text they could find. And no, they couldn't gather the text all over the world, right? Anyway, I have more access than anyone ever did in the history of the world. And it's all there just in a... Okay, it's good. I'm looking back through a couple of comments here, and I'm glad for your comments and feedback. A question here: do the words in different translations of the Bible really contradict each other? And if so, is there an error? It's an interesting question. I mean, if what we mean by this is, are the translations different, or do they go different, make different decisions? The answer is yes, they always have. What do you do then? Well, you study it. So if I come to a passage, this happened to me recently. I was reading in the Tagalog, and the Tagalog did something different than the English. That's interesting. What's going on? So anyway, I spent maybe 30 minutes and pulled out some commentaries, and they explained to me what was going on. Okay, this particular Greek word could be rendered that way, or it could be rendered that way. And the Tagalog guys made this decision, and the English guys made that decision. And anyway, they made those distinctions. They were different. They were different readings. But it doesn't mean that I couldn't find out what was going on. I needed to open a commentary and do a little reading. That's it. So if you see a difference, you study it. But that's all we ever did, right? If I had a question about a passage, I studied it. That's all I ever did. So there's some questions or some thoughts in there. Okay, I think that's all that I will comment on that. Yeah. Okay. Great. Good comment there too. You're right. I mean, in terms of proportion, I emphasized this with with the people at our church yesterday. For putting away all hatred and evil speaking and slander. It was a list of like 5 words. And I just emphasized to them, I said, so what do these words mean? Like, tell me what slander and evil speaking and jealousy, tell me what that really means, like coming from Greek. So they're all kind of looking at me. I said, it means slander, evil speaking, jealousy is what it means. I mean, and I wanted to do that on purpose just to kind of highlight, because I do really want to hammer this. Hey, when you're reading your English or Tagalog translation, you're reading the Bible. It's not like I open the Greek, or Dr. K or Brother Gerard opens the Hebrew, you look at it, and all kinds of light shines. You open your English, and all kinds of light shines, right? There's no special Bible for some people. All of us have the same Bible. I want to emphasize that for people. Okay, I should move into the next question. That was dynamic versus formal equivalence. The question here, and let me put that up here on the screen as well. Dynamic versus formal, can we translate biblical words non-literally? Is that legitimate? Question of dynamic versus literal translations. What would you guys say? What feedback would you give, chat or otherwise? If you want to open up your microphone, that's great. But how would you process that, or how do we... Let's together out loud about it and process it together. What do you think? Can we do that? Should we do that? What can... This is the one we're at. In fact, just help us focus it. What do you think? It's good. Great. I like that a lot. Thank you. Yeah, okay, so go ahead and recognize as you use tools, use more than one. This thing I was showing you earlier, maybe this is Aquins is the one I use, but you can do this with Logos, you could, in the day, you could do this with BibleWorks. It's a great tool. I just chose out history. The order I'm often working on, ESV, Biblia, KJV, Greek, CSB, anyway, just running through them like that. But it can be super helpful to go through and just compare, see how they rendered something, okay? And here it's pretty straightforward, except for maybe that textual question. But in other places where you're trying to figure out, the one I was in the other day, 1 Peter 2, this is that vice list I'm thinking of, it can be really helpful to see how people render stuff and just make a comparison across. So therefore, rid yourselves, or yeah, this is interesting, even, put away, they said. So put away versus iwaxininya, laying aside, rid yourself, putting aside, get rid of, laying aside. Right? Talikuran. So anyway, it's interesting. And then you can just go in the next word, malice, kasamaan. I said to the people yesterday, that's a little bit too general. But malice, malice, malice. Okay, everybody's doing malice. They did evil. So, okay. Next word, deceit. A nice thing here with accordance is they'll highlight all the way down, so you can see the highlight, and your eye just goes straight down. Basically, everybody's doing deceit. One person did guile, pandaraya, deceit, hypocrisy. Okay, anyway, this is a great method exegetically, and if you've not explored that with your software, make sure you do. It's a really, really good tool for just quickly getting a read on what's going on. Oh, Brother Joseph, interesting. All right, so his argument here, he's doing intertextuality, and that's a really intriguing argument. If you pay attention to the way that the New Testament quotes the Old Testament, it can be pretty dynamic. And of course, what it's quoting is the Septuagint most of the time. Like, I can't give you a number. Been a while since I looked at it, but anyway, definitely more than 50%. So when we're looking at then the New Testament quoting the Septuagint from the Old Testament, honestly, the Septuagint is a pretty free translation, and there's places where the Septuagint kind of goes off a little ways. Just all honesty, it's just where it is, and the New Testament still used it. All right, so there's places where the New Testament defaults or goes back to essentially retranslating the Masoretic text, but majority of the times it is just giving us the Septuagint, even though the Septuagint was not a perfect translation. That's an intriguing data point to put into there, and there has been a dissertation. Michael Barrett did his dissertation on this. What does it mean that the New Testament uses or chooses to chooses to use the Septuagint? That's a really intriguing argument. I like that. It's good. Great. Brother Dennis, excellent. Some words have no equivalent in another language. So let's try that. Personal note. When I was in seminary, I would be... Sorry, I should have explained my terms right at the beginning. My apologies. Formal equivalence makes an effort if you want to say what would more casually be called literal translation. So formal equivalence says, let's go and let's try to keep it word for word. If that's an adjective in Greek, give me an adjective in English. The extreme of this, if somebody says something like, why don't they just tell us what the Greek literally says? Okay. I hear that kind of thing more in the US because more Americans are monolingual. It's really, really handy to be bilingual. Because if you're bilingual, you realize what Brother Dennis said. Languages aren't just a one-for-one. And when I was a seminary student, I was more, okay, formal equivalence, we've got to have it. I think the thing that shifted the needle for me was studying Tagalog and practicing a little bit and realizing how complicated languages can be. And then my wife and I will laugh sometimes to try to play a game, use the Tagalog expression, and then try to figure out what would be the nearest English equivalent. And truthfully, to capture the real feeling of a Tagalog expression, sometimes the English equivalent is just way over here, like a long phrase. It's very dynamic to really capture the feeling of it. And if you actually translate it literally, you get something bizarre. So I was playing around with some of this just to see what would happen. And some thoughts here are some examples. In Tagalog, I apologize. I'm being a little biased here to the Filipinos that are with us. But how do you put these ones in English? Oo nga eh, walang pakialam, wala siyang pakialam, or sabagay. How do you put that into English? No, we have ways. Oo nga eh would be like something like, you guys would have to help me. So I'm like, okay, I see what you're saying now. Or, okay, all right, yeah, you've got a point, or something like that. Sabagay would be, oh yeah, now that you said it. Oh, I agree. I don't know. I mean, I'm not, how exactly do you do these? But to say these literally just doesn't work. Sabagay literally is like to the thing. It just doesn't work, right? And these are standard idioms. They just don't. It just doesn't work out like that. Again, I'm sorry, more Tagalog here, but I poked around online a little bit on ABS-CBN, and I found translations that they had, because they sometimes give like an official speaking and then they'll give the translation. If you want, I'll give this to you later. It's kind of fun to see what they do. It's pretty close, but there's some places where they're doing different things, yeah? It's just different. So just kind of watching what was going on. Mark 5:7 is an interesting example of a New Testament idiom. And if you go there, the passage we're talking about, give me a second, clear out some windows. Let me put it up as well in Greek. So here, he cried out with a loud voice. Our English rendering of it goes, he cried out with a loud voice, "What have I to do with thee?" Literally, he cried out with a great voice. That, they don't have a separate. They're not going to use a separate word for loud. They're going to use great. He cried out with a great voice, and he is saying with a great voice, "What to me and to you?" I remember hitting this as a student studying Greek. It's like, what? What to me and to you? Did I get some of my cases wrong here or something? No, that's what it means. What to me and to you gets rendered, "What have I to do with thee?" Or some of the other translations, if we go ESV, "What have you to do with me?" So they actually switched it. You notice that? King James said, "What do I have to do with you?" And the ESV said, "What have you to do with me?" If we do somebody that's going to be a little more interpretational, "What do you have to do with me?" Okay, let's see NIV, what they're going to do. This is interesting. "What do you want with me?" They interpreted. All right, because the idiom is, what do we have to do with each other? And that's why the King James can say, "What have I to do with thee?" And the ESV can say, what do you have to do with me? And they're both saying the same thing. What do we have to do with each other is the idea. NIV interpreted, "What do you want with me?" That's not necessarily in the idiom. So they added some interpretational stuff in there. But that's it. We've got idioms like this. And you have no choice but to go ahead and be dynamic to explain a little bit. And just for comment, some of the more literal translations overall will have places where they're being a little interpretive. So the classic one for King James and Romans, "God forbid," that's very much an interpretation of an idiom. So anyway, every translation does it. And I wouldn't say that one is necessarily being more accurate and the other one is twisting. They are maybe sometimes interpreting, but in order to get the idea across, there's arguments that go both ways. So anyway, I think that's that would be my answer. There are pros and cons in both directions. Any other comments we want to toss in there, or further discussion on that? I don't see any comments there, so I'll keep on moving. All right, here's what I'd like to do, one more, and it's rather different because, forgive me, it's not from any of you. This is from a Twitter feed that I came across, and it's a person who does well, it's an author you may well, anyway, it was a public feed, so it's not like I need to protect the author's privacy. Hannah Anderson, so very good writer, and I've benefited from a lot of thoughts that she's put out. She put this up, and I don't know. Anyway, let's process it a little bit, and then maybe over the break we'll think through it and see what conclusions she came with. I'll read it. Had a great conversation with a friend in local church ministry yesterday, still mulling over a comment she made. Orthodoxy is a means to an end, not the end itself. It struck me because it's difficult to overestimate the gulf between those who pursue orthodoxy as an end and those who see it as the means. But this difference is often obscured when the most important thing is aligning toward an orthodox position. In other words, while holding orthodoxy is essential, it's not sufficient. It's not enough to hold the correct position on an issue. When holding the orthodox position becomes the goal, I think what we're looking for is you've missed the whole point. Well, can't edit, so we'll keep on moving. The point of orthodoxy or right theology is to live as we were made to live. The point of orthodoxy is to bring us into communion with God and others. It is teach us how to live love our Creator and our neighbor as ourselves. But when orthodoxy becomes an end in itself, it's far too easy to hold a position without pursuing these larger goals. It's far too easy to assure ourselves that we're right because we hold the right position. Correspondingly, when a certain position becomes the goal and standard of righteousness, we'll have zero incentive to entertain challenges, consider questions, or have an ounce of self-awareness about the position we hold. It is enough to hold the position. The beauty of truth is that it brings life, it brings healing, it brings wholeness. The beauty of truth is that it reconciles us to God and each other. That's the goal of orthodoxy. That's the goal of teaching. And because this goal is so important, we must cling to truth. We must proclaim it as life and health and peace. We must offer as the good news that it truly is. But by the same token, we must not practice that sleight of hand that holds out a certain position as the goal and then brooks any challenge to it, resists or refuses, especially if we can't convincingly show how our position leads to the life of flourishing that orthodox even if hard. Truth will make my life beautiful and whole, even if hard. In conclusion, holding orthodox positions is not enough because this is the goal of orthodoxy. The goal is shalom, truly reconciling us to others. The goal that far supersedes all our myopic clamoring to be right about a particular issue. All right, anyway, let's just analyze a little bit. There are points that are made here, things that are helpful correctives. There are things that could be concerns or disagreements, both directions. What do you think? How would we work that? I'm sorry to pull our mental energies in a different direction, but someone just commenting to me, and this is more a Filipino thing. But the comment, what do you do in Tagalog with opo? How do you handle that? If you don't use this, it's an honorific, a respect. You stick in this respect, kind of like sir, ma'am thing. If you don't do that culturally, it's really rude. But in the original, they don't have that in there. So do you make the speakers in the Bible start using these little, do they start saying Paul, even though there was no equivalent at all in the original languages? If you don't, can it come across a little bit? Anyway, there's a whole discussion conversation we could have there. We can go there if we have time. It's an interesting translational question, but I'll just paste in the comment that the person was sending me. Great. What do you think? Sorry, whiplash. Thoughts here? Orthodoxy. What is the goal of orthodoxy? My analysis, a distinction being drawn here between the positions, the orthodox positions you hold, holding something without love, almost like a 1 Corinthians 13. So it's almost, this first part, if I have all knowledge, well, if I have all orthodoxy, if I have a perfect doctrinal statement and have not love, it profits me nothing. Okay, point made, point scored, point taken, right? I think that's the point she's shooting after. What do you think? Just interaction or thoughts here? Follow-up question in respect to our initial question, the 5 branches of theology. And the question was, when were those branches started? How did they get going? And when people originally did theology, did they have this concern for articulating those 5 branches? And my answer would go, no. I mean, this distinction, particularly the distinction of biblical theology, that's like not even 200 years old. Really, biblical theology, as the way we're discussing it, is this century, or last century, isn't it? The 20th century. So these are very recent frameworks for talking about it. However, from the very beginning, people have asked questions that were in each one of these branches. So it's not like these branches have a life of their own. These are concerns, and then in the recent, last 100 years, we've started recognizing them as the way to carve up the task. But people 1,000 years ago were asking the same questions, even if they didn't call it what we call it. That makes sense? So, okay. So, yeah, we're back on the thinking about this, the Twitter feed, and a comment here. I appreciate trying to correct a contentment with just being right doctrinally, since truth needs to be transformative and practiced. We do need to be a bit more balanced, acknowledge that there is a rightness in being right doctrinally. Of course, we can't be smug about it, but doctrinal rightness is important. Right, I mean, absolutely. I think, actually, in the Twitter feed, or in that feed, I think as it's going along, then there you can see a kind of a back and forth. Even in the progress of the thoughts that are there, she's balancing both sides, and she's working back and forth between them. I'm not super comfortable with pitting doctrinal rightness against personal, ethical, lived out rightness. I mean, in fact, if I'm going to Scripture, what I get is the linkage would go, sound doctrine leads to sound living. That the best way to get the living we want is make sure that our doctrine is correct. So to disconnect those and say something like sound doctrine is part of our problem, I want to be fair. That's not what is being said there. But to disconnect those as though sound doctrine somehow starts being against the concepts of shalom, right living, wholeness as a person. I feel like, anyway, the biblical emphasis is exactly pointing the opposite direction. So I don't like any kind of disconnect between those. For myself, how can I best live right? And the answer is think right. And I'm never going to do better than pursue knowing God. I can agree with the idea. Well, I guess I don't entirely. The opening comment, orthodoxy is a means to an end, not the end itself. I don't agree even with that notion, because right thinking and right living are equally restoration. What's wrong with me? My brain is broken, my living is broken, my affections are broken, me is broken. That includes the way I think. So getting my thinking right is part of wholeness. Getting my thinking right is part of sanctification. And in that sense, in the sense of sanctification, being more like Jesus, honoring him, living for him, in the sense of all those things, it's an end in itself. I mean, I've got to get my thinking right to honor and glorify Jesus, my King. It is an end in itself. Along with secondary end in itself, they move together and live it out. So anyway, any kind of disconnect between those, I'm not comfortable with. It was an interesting line of thinking to make me think, to make me process what was it that I wasn't super comfortable with and processing it. So, and some good evocative thoughts there make us think through some things. So grateful for that. Yeah, I mean, Brother Joseph commented here. You can find, and you'll find this actually. JWs, Mormons, SDA. You'll find them arguing, "Hey, we've got good people that love their families and are whole people," and so that proves the truth for them, the truthfulness of their views. And that's not a road I'm not real happy going down that road. All right, here, I need to spend some time talking about this. Definitely we need to get here. That's the sonship discussion based off of Dr. Minnick's presentation that he gave us here. So let me show you the question, and then let's talk about it for a minute or two and see where we can go with it. Here. Is sonship future or present? So the question went, as I read the conclusion of the dissertation, I became a little interested, curious to know more of the future aspect of our sonship as imparted by the resurrection. So Dr. Minnick's argument was resurrection is specifically linked to sonship, kind of the culmination of our sonship, is my understanding. And so the questioner here was asking, as many as received him to them gave he the power, or noting, passages like, as many as received him to them gave he the power to become sons of God, even to them that believe on his name. I'm working right now, my family, we're trying to memorize our way through, and I'm in 1 John 3, and so I was working on this today. So see what kind of love the Father has made known to us, that we should be called the children of God. And so we are. We are now sons of God. What we will be has not yet appeared. So anyway, you've got passages like this that are very explicit, that our sonship is now. And so, yes, I'm right in with that. I think Dr. Minnick would be too. I know he would be, because he talked about it. So our sonship is complete already when we were converted. Well, let's build this a little bit here. My thoughts. I'm not settled completely myself on what I thought in summary of our time with Dr. Minnick. I thought it was very evocative, and it made me I want to read the dissertation. I want to consider the thoughts. I'm still trying to figure out what I think. I do think Romans 8:23 probably has at least some implication. It's at least possible that what's going on there is the concept of future sonship that he was describing. And let me read that for you, because it doesn't mean anything for me to say numbers. Romans 8:23. Not only the creation, but we also ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for adoption as sons. So, I mean, you get, right, what he's saying. We are waiting for adoption as sons. So there's a future component to this adoption thing. Now, you can say we're already sons. We're just waiting for the adoption. Okay. I mean, I guess so. This has in it huiathesia, huias. I mean, the word is right in it. So, I mean, I'm not a huge etymology guy, but in any case, these two words go together. So it's a little tough to separate those out. And I think Dr. Minnick then has probably that there is a component of sonship that seems to point future. So how would we put those together? Because no question, you've got major passages that are explicit to say we are sons of God. Now we are sons of God, 1 John 3. I think I like the idea here of inauguration leading to culmination. So the notion here, this fits in with salvation. Am I saved? Or am I waiting to be saved? Or am I being saved? And you know what the answer to that is? It's yes. Right? I am saved in a kind of a past sort of sense. But I am also being saved, and I also will be saved. So there's all of those notions are in there together. I think we probably have just the same thing going on with this. Something like that, where, okay, it was inaugurated, it was begun, but the full process of its explanation has not yet come about. And you can actually get that in the passage I was just alluding to. So if we go back to 1 John chapter 3, I have right within the same passage, let me change my share up, right here, the Father has given us that we should be called children, sons of God. We are God's children now. But then here's a future component. What we will be has not yet appeared. So we are sons, but we're still waiting for the full fruition of it, maybe. Something like that. So as an attempt, though, to clarify this and a couple of other things that we got in Dr. Minnick's presentation, let me go back, because several of you asked related questions from his presentation, which is great. I'm glad it created a lot of questions. Here, it was sonship and Jesus. In relationship to Dr. Minnick's dissertation, I have some questions about Jesus' sonship. Here are my attempts at putting them into words. We know that Jesus is fully God and fully man. But does that mean he may not have acquired full sonship before his resurrection? So as Dr. Minnick saying, Jesus became the Son at his resurrection. And I know Dr. Minnick's going to say, no, no, no. Okay, so let's keep on going. Second question. At Jesus' baptism with the Holy Spirit descending on him, God the Father declared, "This is my beloved Son." Does that refer to the immaterial part? And then finally, we know that Jesus is the Son from eternity past. Does it mean that he took up the immaterial part of sonship during his incarnation? So to try to answer those questions, and I'm going to run this past Dr. Minnick and hopefully be able to get an answer to you by our last class. But I think I get what he would say. Never speak for another person. But we'll see, and I'll try to get feedback from him. I put this into a table, and I hope maybe this can help clarify some of this. So here, how about this as two tables, actually. I think what he's distinguishing is pre-incarnate sonship and glorified sonship. In other words, my understanding of his lecture was Jesus Christ is eternally the Son, in one sense. But there was another expression of sonship that was connected to the resurrection. So there's a pre-incarnate sonship, and there is a incarnate, yea, verily, up to glorification sonship. And the distinctions, as you go down these sides of the table here, from eternity, on the one side, pre-incarnate, this would be ontology, who he is in himself by his nature and his being forever and ever and ever. And if I get it right, this is the block I wasn't sure about. But I don't think this is directly parallel to humans, which would make sense, right? He's eternally the Son of God in this unique kind of like essential holiness kind of way. Okay, but on the other side, the glorified sonship, this would be incarnational, culminating in his resurrection. It's functional. It's a messianic role that he accepted and took. And it began in our, in the parallel to us, begins in our justification, culminates in our resurrection and glorification. So where there's no parallel here to humans at all, over here, this would be parallel. The idea over here, maybe this is the way to do it, on this side, the glorified sonship side, this side of it would be something he did because Adam failed. In other words, Jesus Christ was Son from all eternity past. That was a reality before there was creation. God creates the world. Adam sins. Adam was intended or was supposed to be, well, that's not helpful. Adam was supposed to be a son in the sense of a servant, a co-heir. He failed. So Jesus steps in his messianic role to fulfill what Adam failed to do. And that, in that sense, is parallel to us. Okay. Maybe if that doesn't make sense, you can go back and hit Dr. Minnick's lecture. He talked through some of that. I could expand this right here, just this one, or really, this whole half. This whole half is expanded out into this table. Does that make sense? Whole half. Wow, that's cool. So this is eternity past. This is off the table. This side of it is off the table, not part of it. But on this side, since this is parallel to humans, this entire side we could open up, and actually I think there's a further split into it. In the life of Christ, the parallel there would be my present immaterial restoration. I am already justified. I am already in Christ. My body's still falling apart. But my spirit is made to be justified. It is already restored. Okay, and then what I'm awaiting is the full physical restoration, and that would be parallel to Jesus' resurrection. So these two together are within this role, the glorified sonship role. Okay. I think I've sufficiently destroyed the diagram with lines and circles. Did that make any sense? Did that clarify anything? I want to be very clear, Dr. Minnick was not saying that Jesus Christ became the Son at his resurrection. That's not his view. Dr. Minnick's clear on the fact that Jesus Christ has always been the Son. What he's doing is it's like there are two senses. Jesus Christ was eternally the Son, and then he took a functional role during his life and his resurrection that was culminated in his resurrection. And so that was a functional expression of sonship. But in terms of Son, the only begotten Son of the Father, he's always been that. That's an essential ontological. He used the word ontological. That's an essential eternal kind of thing. So don't know if that helps any. Yeah, question. Are believers adopted into the family of God, or are they born again into the family of God? And that's going to get into this. He discussed some of that. His argument, and I hate representing someone else. So my understanding of his argument, it doesn't mean it was his argument. My understanding of it is that he's understanding adoption as truly meaning more like you're born in. And the reason going there, when we understand adoption in terms of the cultural context, kind of the way we use adoption, you were adopted into the family, that kind of concept. You end up doing a lot of cultural stuff. Well, what were they doing in their culture at the time? And he wants to understand the word in the sense of it's an ontological thing. You were made a son. So becoming a son. That was something I was kind of pressing or asking a little bit about, and in our discussion there he was saying, that's a struggle. He's to define that word in a way that you don't have a lot of background to support it with. But that's a struggle. Okay. If you missed some of that, or some of that wasn't really sticking, I'll just say that was the most nuanced lecture we had. That was a very thick lecture, and the distinctions there were really nuanced. So I would say if you felt like you missed some of the stuff that's in there, that's okay. It was pretty detailed. Yeah, that was pretty detailed stuff. It was good. It was challenging, but pretty detailed stuff. I'm going to hit a couple of things here that are really fast and it's really easy to talk through here, I think. Someone was asking here, these were specifically for my dissertation. I had a note in one spot, and I just said the religious leaders would not listen to Jesus' words, but that proves that he is speaking the truth. How did I arrive at that conclusion? I don't know. You can just discount that footnote. It's really not even worth the time for me to chase after it. If you look in there, the context is John 8:39 to 47. I think what I was thinking 10 years ago was probably it's kind of like an abductive argument, meaning how do you explain why they're rejecting Jesus? And if you think like John 3, this is the condemnation, light is coming to the world. Men loved darkness rather than light because their deeds were evil. I mean, it actually, when wicked people reject the truth, I suppose it doesn't prove that it's truth because they reject a lot of other things too. But be surprised when they reject the truth, right? When the truth convicts them and rebukes them for their wickedness, and they reject it, nobody's shocked. I think there's a strain of that in John, but you can take it or leave it. That's not an idea that I wouldn't want to spend time defending or something. Here, there was a comment in my dissertation, clearly God speaks to man using logical constructions. Therefore, it's fully acceptable for man to derive logical inferences from God's revelation. How do we reconcile that with Isaiah 55:8? And I would just say here, this statement would have to be understood in the framework of the entire argument in that chapter, that there is both continuity and discontinuity between God's thoughts and ours. So there's ways in which I'm made in the image of God. Part of that is that my reasoning does go down the channels of the way that he thinks, in the sense that God is one, he is truth, he is consistent with himself. Some of those things have been packed in my head, and they're like literally in my DNA, and they're the way that we work because we're made in the image of God. At the same time, like you said, yes, absolutely, God's thoughts are, they're so entirely different from ours that yeah, I mean, you almost could be forgiven for saying there was no similarity, and yet God speaks to us as though there is analogy between our words and his. I just put down here Isaiah 1:18 because I was thinking Isaiah. That's the passage, come let us reason together. I mean, think about that. So God says to people, come, let us reason together. I, God, will reason together with you, human. I made you, but I will reason together with you. Look, come on, let's be reasonable. It's very, very just amazing and intriguing. So, yeah. There's a deeper, if you wanted to go, there's like a big philosophical discussion that was super not helpful between Van Til and Gordon Clark, and it was whether God's thinking is analogous or entirely disanalogous. It was not really a high point in the history of theology. But anyway, you could chase that debate down if you want. It was an interesting, just kind of a pointless debate they had. New perspective on Paul. Someone asked here, how concerned should we be about N.T. Wright and Jimmy Dunn's new perspective on Paul? Any significance to our ministries? My intuition is that the new perspective, ironically, the new perspective on Paul is already old. It was cool about 10 years ago, and it was the thing, and it was the new perspective, and now it's last decade's perspective. That's the problem with chasing trendy theology. If you chase trendy theology in order to be cool and up to date, then the trends change. So you got to keep chasing. New perspective on Paul is not really spoken so much anymore as the new cutting edge thing. However, I do think what it left us, my suspicion, it has left us with still marks, and the mark that's left, or the star that's left over, is the general suspicion that we have the Bible through the lens of its original culture. The idea that if you read the Bible, you don't really get it until you go back, and Dr. Collins took us through this, right? There's a whole series of books, The Lost World of. And so the idea, you've got to go back and find out the way that their culture thought about things, and then that helps you understand what the text really means. And that, I think, is the scar that's left over. Brother Kenneth asking, can we say the new perspective is now discredited, no one really uses it? I mean, there's always going to be some guy somewhere. But no, I mean, I would say, on the contrary, probably those thoughts just kind of got folded into further conversations, and we kept on going. So I think those thoughts kind of morphed into, it's kind of like, is JDPD still with us? The idea that you can go back into the Pentateuch and you can see like the Yahwehist sections and the Pentateuchal section. Right? You can go through and find all these, and within the Pentateuch, here's each one of these Elohim sections and so forth. And so is that still with us? No. I mean, I don't know anybody who's like, this is the cutting edge, this is what you've got to know. But the scars of it and the ideas of it just morphed into new, more rotten forms. And I think probably that's the way new perspective will be viewed in the history books. So I don't view new perspective as like, it's here with us to stay, watch out, it's coming for your church. I don't think so. But some of the ideas are getting recycled. So that's probably about as far as I'll go there. A couple more. And then I'd like to, anyway, there's another thing I'd like us to discuss or interact with on together. Evangelizing children. Someone wanted to know here, how could you teach us how to evangelize our children? Can you teach your theology when your child is not even saved? This is right at the front of my heart because we just did a class Saturday, and then my wife is working on it. That's what we were chatting about earlier before I came in here today. This whole concept is right in there with the notions of teaching the Bible to children and the degree to which children really are able to grasp solid, strong theology, thick theology. And my answer to that is absolutely. Children can grapple with thick theology. All right, this is the first time I've ever done this in this type of class, so forgive me. But this literally just happened, and my wife posted it, and the easiest way for me to show it to you is to read it to you. It just happened like 28 minutes ago. We have a record. Caroline, this is the 5-year-old. I love you. I'll miss you. Sometimes when I can't hear you anymore, I feel like you're dead. Okay. Sarah's writing this. Well, I have to sleep, but God never sleeps. But I know it said that Jesus slept, and Jesus is God, right? Jesus came to earth fully God, fully man, one person of the Trinity, my wife says. But I don't know how we can say that the three are one if one is sleeping and the others aren't. All right, she's asking questions that are going straight at like the thickest questions of theology, the Trinity and the Incarnation. And asking a question like, how can Jesus sleep when he was on earth? When he was God. Like, right. I mean, that's huge. Yesterday or the day before, I got hit with a problem of evil question coming out of the 8-year-old and the 7-year-old. And the question was God at some point okay with evil? No. Well, then how did evil get here? Because God created everything. And if God knew that people were going to sin, why did he create those people? Since God knows everything, he could just not create the sinners. Right. Okay, that's a problem of evil question. The answers that you give back to kids on those kinds of questions, you just give them a simple vocabulary form. This is what we did in that conversation. The thought, I was pulling ideas out of my systematic theology syllabus and just saying it to them without the big words. And that's the way we talk to kids. Kids are theologians because they're humans, because they're made in the image of God. They are theologians. Everyone who can talk, think, answer questions about God and the world using Scripture is a theologian. And even people who try not to use Scripture to answer their questions. So how do we evangelize our children? How do we teach theology when our children are not even saved? Based then off of that theology definition, if theology is what happens when we carefully answer questions about God and the world using Scripture, then it is theology when I say to the 2-year-old, why did you sin? Sin is bad. Don't sin. Sin hurts you. You need help. Jesus will save you. That right there was the gospel. That can be said to a 2-year-old. She's not old enough to get saved, but I'm going to get that into her brain. When she is old enough to get saved, she'll know where to start. Another concept here, because the question here, how can you teach theology when the child is not even saved? Well, what do I do when I give the gospel to somebody? In other words, part of, I think it's a definitional question, what is theology? When I evangelize someone, I am teaching them theology. What I'm teaching them is God is like this, God takes sin seriously, you are a sinner, Jesus is the solution to that. That's all theology, right? So evangelism is theology, right? Let's remember, you wouldn't want to think lost people can't be theologians. Lost people can comprehend and talk about theology. Even Satan knows theology. James 2, this is, you believe that God is one, you do well. The demons also believe and tremble. Satan does theology. If Satan can do theology, by all means, lost people can do theology. They don't do it well, or more significantly, they don't do it unhypocritically, because they have to submit to it and believe and accept it. But they are still doing theology. What do unbelievers most need to hear? Theology, the gospel, the truth. What do seasoned believers, people who have been saved for 40 years, what do they need to hear? Theology, the gospel, the truth, right? So just give the gospel. Sometimes you don't know if the child is saved or not. I would say it makes no difference on how you speak to them. Well, I mean, it can. But either way, give them the gospel. Because saved people and unsaved people need it. So talk to them either way. I am shy with my kids to give them strong assurance. You got saved. I don't talk to them that way. I just keep on giving them the gospel. And by God's grace, they have made professions of faith. But either way, I need to give them the gospel. Okay, if I can move fast, I can cover, I think, most of the other questions, and then we have one that we'll discuss together that I think will be a fun discussion. So I'm scanning through here. Let me hit these two. There's two in here that I'm going to interact with somebody just personally, just because I don't know that they'll have a broad helpfulness for all of us. So it's more one person's question, I'm happy to engage with them. So let's go to one or two disqualifications from ministry. The final paper, ecclesiastical separation. Sorry. A question here was disqualification from ministry. Someone asked here, does a person who committed adultery, is that person disqualified to study theology? Dr. Throfall hit this really, really well. I loved his answer. The thing that a person who's just fallen into sin, what they most need is theology. That's back to our definition of what is theology, right? Theology, answering questions about God and the world, carefully using Scripture. That person needs... I'm going to be desperate to get that guy back into theology, meaning, here's a Bible, read it, man. You sinned. You need help, right? That's the biggest thing he needs if he committed adultery. The Bible, truth. Can he still be in the ministry? I think that's the question we're asking. And some considerations here. The governing word, kind of the head word for those qualifications in those two chapters is the word blameless. So that's the defining thing you always go to with this question. Can a person still be in ministry? Well, are they blameless? Meaning, will people in their ministry, they're trying to do ministry, and people are saying, yeah, but look at what you did. Okay, that guy has lost his blamelessness at that point. Another consideration to make us reserved here, one indicator of doctrinal problems in the false teacher passages is that people live their lives, that affects their theology. So this moves to both directions. Bad theology produces bad living. Bad living produces bad theology, because the process of you're trying to process what you did, your head is messed up. Sin distorts, clouds our thinking, and so you've got to I don't want to say metabolize, but you've got to process what happened. This event happened, you did an awful thing. You've got to process that, and your brain is going to squish out in all kinds of bad directions to excuse it, and you're going to even come up with theological propositions to excuse yourself. So one of the things to do, I think, is not to trust yourself in such a case. Anyway, hopefully this is not going to be any of us. But you wouldn't want to trust yourself, because your actions were off. Probably your thinking is going to show it. And what you need for a good long period of time is somebody to help you. I mean, because you basically just stabbed yourself and you've got a gaping wound that's seeping infection. You know, I mean, it's just you've got this gaping wound in yourself. You need time for that to heal before you're going to start jumping back in and being a teacher. And a major concern I have about the way evangelicalism has often processed this is, you know, a guy 6 months later or something, it's like, well, God's grace and he's been forgiven, and so now he's back in the ministry. That's messed up. It's a little better now, I think. Things seem to have done better, but that's been a pattern for a long time. Okay, though, now I'm coming the other direction. Technically, the qualification that we're talking about here, the blameless, is technically addressed to pastoral ministry. I don't want to go beyond the actual statements of the text. So I could see something like this. Let's say a guy came to me and an incident had happened in his life and he had done this, a disqualifying kind of sin. Could he still have a writing ministry? You know, and I think what I would want to say, I would encourage him to do that eventually. I'd want him first to be sure that all of this has been processed, right? Is his family, how's the marriage doing, right? How are the kids doing? His moral life, what's going on? And you want to see some time go by just before a guy puts himself, and then you almost would want to ask the guy, like, you know, maybe you should write with a pseudonym or something. I don't know. I could see something like that. Anyway, I don't have a problem with a guy maybe that had gifts and education and that kind of thing. Technically, the barrier is for pastoral ministry. But, you know, we recognize sin affects a lot of things, including our thinking. So we'll be cautious. I could see something like that being possible. Let me roll down here. Someone asked about ecclesiastical separation, intersecting practical systematic theology. At what point does ecclesiastical discipline and separation kick in as applied to Bible versions, music, worship style, church attire, obesity, etc.? So here, this happens. Sometimes we don't want to be connected to a certain church because of their music. And I mean, point made here, sometimes other issues that should be equivalent, honestly, we give them a pass, and then there's certain issues where we're particularly sensitive and we don't want to be connected to a church on those issues. We should make an effort at being kind of consistent on the level of issues that we go after. It's hard to do. The standard pattern we give for separation from the world, false teachers, willfully disobedient brothers. I ban, instead of us, okay, we have 3 categories. That's a good heuristic start. That's a good pedagogical start when you're teaching it initially. But it's helpful also to recognize between those. In other words, there's a line drawn across, which is the pattern of a holy God refuses any countenance with mixed situations. Well, I mean, suppose we're all mixed situations, aren't we? But that's the concept behind it. So it's not just like, if you can't prove to me that this guy belongs in 2 Thessalonians 3, then I'm good. It's not really, right? It's not really just quite that simple. There's a pattern across here. There's a continuum. There's a pattern that we draw. So in keeping with that notion, I would like to argue that the degree of distancing or close relationship is also a continuum. In other words, for myself, the way I process this, I don't necessarily see it in digital terms. You are the world, you are a false teacher, or you are a willfully disobedient brother. And if you're that, boom, I cut you off. It's more just across a continuum. I have relationships and such that maybe would fit into that third category, but what do you say? Like they're 30% in the category? I don't know. Anyway, whatever degree, there's different layers or level of degree. And so therefore, I think I want my association to match that. And this gets into practical stuff, like, maybe there's a group that for one particular purpose you could work together with them, but you wouldn't want to have a joint service with them. Maybe you could get together with a group and, I don't know, picket some political cause or something, and you wouldn't be bothered if you both together picket for the political purpose. But if it came to having a joint service, or you're gonna come together and you're gonna fuse and become one church, like, no, we're just not there. So I think that's allowed. I think that it's allowed to recognize a degree of distancing across. So I think that would be my answer there. Practical question that relates to our class here, the final paper, and others of you may have questions like this. I'll skip down here. Someone's wondering here, for the paper for this class, can we do something that advances the dissertation, like an argument tree that maps out how we're getting to conclusions, supporting the thesis, a table that visualizes the data to find connections and make conclusions? Great. I am 100% behind any way of making a paper fit your dissertation. I'm doing this right now on a class I took on Islam, and I know where my dissertation is going, and I'm trying to find a way to make Islam connect to my dissertation with that, which has nothing to do with Islam. And so you find ways to do this, and I think this sounds like a great way to do it. I think it would be probably maximally profitable if you did like a table or an argument tree, and that was part of it, and then for the rest of it, maybe that could be, the last part of it could be text or pages that you could put into the paper. So see if you can find a way to make it a chapter. What occurs to me is, if there's a practical theology aspect of your paper, this is the time to write that. Because the practical theology, being kind of the peak of the process, pulls in all of the ideas underneath. That could be a good way to do it. One or two comments I wanted to make about the previous paragraph in the question, because the asker was asking about the 3 levels, level 1, level 2, level 3. My understanding in Dr. Howard's discussion of level 2 and level 3, my understanding of that, the reason for his distinction was to say level 1, here, I'm sorry to scroll back and forth on you. Level 1 is logical arrangement of ET, biblical theological. That is an obvious shoo-in. Level 2 coordinating, coalescing multiple lines, bringing them together. That's pretty obvious too. His argument was level 3 gets into the invalid, illegitimate range of things. I think that was his argument. And I'm basing that off of just long-term relationship as well. He very much impacted my thinking, with an emphasis on this instead of building our theology into this logical guess stacked on that logical guess stacked on that logical guess, and it gets further and further out there and further tenuous. Stop doing that. Build it solidly on the text. That was a big concept that he emphasized. So my understanding and my reading of that lecture was that level 3 is kind of like, I'm not going to say it's wrong, but be careful once you get out there. So I don't think we want to take this lecture as an enthusiastic endorsement or level 3 is the place to be, or like that's what we're shooting for. And so my understanding here, if I'm building that out there, my understanding is actually we're moving into levels 2, maybe 3, anytime we are making applications or answering questions that the text never explicitly proposed. In other words, the demands of connecting Bible study to life automatically takes us there anyway. So I don't think I have to work at getting out to level 2 or 3. I think my kids take me there. I think my classes take me there. When they ask me this question, and the question, here's the text, and here's biblical theology, and here's systematic theology, and they ask you a question out there, that's pushing you to have to bring, whoa, never thought of that one before. How do I fit this? Right. So I think this just happens, the demands of life, or someone comes to you and they've messed up their life with a terrible choice, right? So now you're doing systematic, practical, biblical to bring them along. That's what's happening there. So I don't know if that helps. I don't think we really end up having often to work to get out there into level 2 or 3. I think life pulls us there. It's easier when you're a student in a seminary to just stay in level 1. You just be gloriously in pure biblical theology, and it can all just be hypothetical. But life pulls us out into the complex stuff. Okay, here was a question, and I think I've covered everything else except for this one. And then I'll hit this one quick, and then we'll probably wrap up some ideas with one other discussion I want to have. So the question here, how do we avoid empty questions and vain speculations? And here, specifically the wording, how does one constantly critique method, theological or related, to stay on the right path without going too far down a rabbit hole that is either unhelpful or productive? My mind immediately goes, for this question, my mind immediately goes to like seminary discussions where a guy's writing his dissertation, and he's really stressed out. It's a huge deal. And he brings up this like tiny distinction that you've never heard of before. That's kind of the picture of this. And to give some biblical data on that, Scripture does imply a kind of hierarchy of doctrine. Some issues are speculations, vain discussions, irreverent babble, foolish controversies that are unprofitable and worthless. So we have a good bit of data. Pastors are to have nothing to do with foolish, ignorant controversies. I mean, we have a lot of biblical data recognizing things like this. So here, my answer on this would go, how do I stay out of that, or how do I avoid that? And I think your answer, with the 5 branches we've talked about all the way through here, I think each one of those contain inside of themselves a natural guard that pushes you back from irrelevance if you'll listen to it. So what do I mean by that? And I think it'll help us visualize this if I actually put that, if we put this up on the screen so we're able to look at it. Each one of these contains a guard against irrelevance. How do I keep using exegesis? How do I keep from going down a rabbit hole that's irrelevant, pointless? Well, if the Bible hardly ever talks about it, and if I can't find decent data to support something, in other words, so it's like union with Christ, and you've got like hundreds of verses to digest, right? Justification, you've got just massive amounts of data to work through. What was I working on Oh, I know what it was. It was from Second Peter or First Peter 2. If so be that you have tasted that the Lord is good, and that goes back to Psalm 34, and then from there the Tov, the Hebrew word going through the entire Old Testament. It was just, I mean, it was overwhelming. The Lord is good. The Lord is good. Well, okay, you got something there. Go for it. But if you get into something and you hardly have any exegetical data to support you, you're probably going down an irrelevance hole. So I think exegesis helps push you backwards. Biblical theology, if similar thing, if you can't find an actual theme, so you think you're onto something, but there's no theme to back you up. Okay, systematic theology, if you're finding there's no like significant logical and conceptual support surrounding it, it's probably a point of irrelevance. Historical theology, if the church has never spoken about it, hardly anybody addresses it, maybe there's a reason. Practical theology, if it doesn't help anybody live there, if at the end of the discussion, so how does this help us live our lives better, and you have no answer, maybe you're looking at something that's irrelevant. So I think each one of the 5 branches in its own way answers the question, right? And you can chase that through. If there's nothing that they are giving you direction on, then that's it. So that was the question the person asked, and that was just my attempt to answer the question there. Very helpful question on here. Yeah. How does one constantly critique method to stay on the right path without going too far down the direction in a way that's either unhelpful or unproductive? That's what I'm addressing. And no intention to address anybody, just to address the person that asked the question, which I thought was a good question. So wanted to answer their question since they asked. All right. Let's see. Okay, last discussion that I wanted to talk about. Do rules create legalism? Another great question. And let's chase this a little bit. So I was wondering, in a Bible college, I observed that students tend to think if they comply to all the rules of the school, they will be more spiritual, and also tend to see those who fail to follow the rules are less spiritual. How do we address or think of situations like this? How should schools, especially Bible schools and colleges, set out rules that are biblical and from good systematic theology? Students may get the wrong impression. They're having the wrong impression is that because the rules were imposed the wrong way, that kind of thing. So what do you think? Anyway, if you remember, maybe depending on your experience in Bible college, if your Bible college had a lot of rules, that happened probably. You get students that kind of can turn a little, I don't know, something with it. And so if you keep the rules, you're a good guy, and if you don't keep the rules, you're a bad guy, and it can get condemning. Does this fit into any of our discussions here? And asking like a practical theology kind of discussion. What do we do? I'm part of a Bible college. Some of you are also part of a educational type institution. What do we do? Is the problem having rules? Maybe we should get rid of rules. What do you think? How would you process some of this? Any insights or discussions or things to put? This came through, but rules came from error. I the rules would hopefully our practical behavior, but sure, fair enough. Yeah, teachers in schools line up the students who obey, keeping the rules. Spiritual disciplines. Yeah, anyway, there's helping people maintain some kind of rigor, set in some habits into their lives. So great. A comment that I tend to think here is like when I was in college, there were certain requirements about dress, and so of course students complained about it. Then the students graduate and they go get a job. Guess what? depending on their job. A lot of those jobs had dress requirements. You know, governments have rules equals legalism. Governments have rules. I don't think those governments are trying to be legalistic. Into the life of a Bible. A private at all times. Rules target the heart. Punishment also needs to target the heart rather than just behavior. It's good. Rules are there to keep order and decorum. Good. I'll toss out some thoughts and then you can bounce off of these and see what you think. This maybe is a little cynical, but I don't know. We'll see. Human beings being what they are, we always sort ourselves out. We always make comparisons. We always evaluate one another. If you want to really nerd out about something, do you know about the Stanford prison experiment? Crazy story. And check it out. But so the simple idea was they had a group and they split the group and they randomly throw dice. Half of them are prison guards in this simulation, half of them are prisoners. And they put them in this simulation. And immediately attitudes change and the guards start acting like they're something special because they're guards. It was randomly chosen. Anyway, human behavior is all messed up. And if I think of a thought experiment, if you could pick 500 humans from all over the planet, it's random, pick them, and bring them in and put them in a sealed room where they can't leave and lock the door, they will sort themselves. That's what they're going to do. First thing they're going to do is find other people to speak their language. And then from there, they're going to start sorting themselves out into people who are influencers and people who are in control, and they'll create a kind of small police force in order to police themselves. It's going to happen. They can't stop it from happening. So anyway, there's that. Human beings being what they are, that sort of thing is going to go on. And then what we do is we try to find a way to kind of get on top of the stack. Anyway, it's a little discouraging, a little cynical. I think also young people at that stage of life are probably particularly prone to making comparisons. My guess is, if I just think of my own life, once you get past that, you have family, a wife that loves you and you love her, and you kind of have your emotional center of gravity moves inward, and you're kind of just okay within your little. So if people around you think you're a fool, I don't know, you're kind of okay as long as you got your family. But at that point, all in a dorm or something, people just compare themselves. Small sealed social environments heighten that dramatically. In a subcultural environment where spiritual virtue is praised, sin is condemned, I think the value system moves along those lines. You're a good guy if you keep the rules and you do what you're supposed to do. Those making and enforcing the rules don't always have a great read on what's happening on the ground, because on the level of the students within themselves internally, dynamics happen that administrators don't always see. Okay, but that's all kind of explanatory, I think. The solution is not to eliminate rules. Wherever you move the bar, the same dynamics will just migrate there. So, just saw a story, crazy, with the COVID stuff and the colleges, the American secular colleges. And they said, because of COVID, then this year we're going to let people sleep with their girl. How can you tell us that? Really? My point being, if a college just says, we'll move to the furthest extreme. Last year you could sleep with your girlfriend anytime you want, now you can't. People will be mad. So anyway, you couldn't eliminate rules. They would just be angry about something new. And it will accomplish nothing to move the bar. They'll just recalibrate to it. However, I think there is an insight that I thought was helpful from the question that is worth chasing. Colleges probably have to work extra hard to explain a good theology of rules and why we have them. And this was what one of the guys messaged me, the anonymous one there. Some rules exist just so that we can function. right? So everybody turn in your form at the office by Friday. That's not ethical. Others are actually expressive of biblical norms, no beer or pornography. Okay, that's just biblical. Most rules are some combination of both. Everybody turn off your phone, go to bed by 10 p.m. Why? So that we don't keep each other awake and annoy each other, which is a way of living in love for one another. But 10 p.m. is not in the Bible, but okay, we just got to pick a time so that we don't drive each other bananas. In either case, intentionally, chronically disobeying rules shows that you have an underlying spiritual problem. Here's the kicker that would help people to grasp. Consistently obeying the rules proves nothing about you either way. Right? In other words, if you disobey rules, I know that you're a rebel. If you obey the rules, you might be a rebel. You just learned how to play the game. Or you might be a good guy that loves the Lord, and you might be doing it because you love him. Or you might just be doing it because you want your friends to think you're spiritual. It proves nothing about you. Okay, so if you go down that track and explaining that to people, maybe it might help young people to explain some of that. Great insights here in the chat. Obeying your authority is part of being righteous, but only part of being righteous. That's it, right? You can keep rules without being spiritual. You can read your Bible without being spiritual. That doesn't mean let's stop reading our Bibles or telling people they should read their Bibles. So this conversation, I think, particularly in an American context, got weird. And any kind of rule then turned into that's legalism. They probably could have done better, I don't know, by explaining early on why they had rules. I know as a young person, I was helped when Jim Berg at BJ explained the theology behind rules. I was like, oh, that distinction that I was saying helped me as a young person. So that's about all I would have there. Okay, that's it. Let's plan then on next time you have these cases. Again, need it, message me. Even what I take a look at them, you'll be doing it. We will divide and you'll do some discussion, and then I will throw some sub questions at you. And then the second hour, you will present some of this. So anyway, I'll just try to stoke the conversation a little bit, even as you're discussing it next week, and try to complicate it some. So, okay, thank you to all. Let me know if you have any questions or problems, and otherwise I'll see you later on Thursday or last. So have a good. Thank you.